Hello, this is Bob Woodward. I'm talking from Washington, D.C. Glad to be with you. A year ago, my wife Elsa and I visited there for a conference. We visited in Seoul. What a great city and great place. And as we are being totally overwhelmed with the COVID-19 virus in this country, we know what has happened in South Korea, and they're going to write a textbook or many textbooks about how you approached it and managed not only getting control of the virus, but minimizing the impact on your economy. What I want to do is summarize some of the findings when I did the second book, Rage, on the relationships that Trump had in South Korea, his attitudes, and what went on with North Korea. And it really, a central player in all of this was, at the time, the first year of the Trump administration, Secretary of Defense Mattis. And Mattis was assigned to really ramp up the military pressure on North Korea. The overall Trump policy was maximum pressure on North Korea rhetorically, which Trump did joyfully, I believe, calling Kim Jong-un just about everything in the book, including a madman. And the diplomatic pressure was increased, and the military pressure also. But what Mattis did, and this was new in my book, Rage, and something that had not been reported before in any way, that Mattis realized as Secretary of Defense, because of what Kim Jong-un had with nuclear weapons, and the nuclear weapons that Kim Jong-un had, Mattis was astounded. The numbers were several dozen, and rather ingeniously, Kim Jong-un had hardened and dispersed those weapons and concealed them, so they presented a threat to the whole world in a very real sense, certainly to South Korea. And so Trump was off tweeting and making declarations about the North Korean leader. The fire and fury charges, they were increasing economic sanctions as part of the campaign against North Korea, this pressure campaign. And Mattis realized that even though nuclear weapons were designed as a deterrent and not to be used, that it was always possible, because he was assigned the responsibility of protecting the homeland of the United States and also protecting South Korea and Japan. So Mattis, one of the coping mechanisms he had was to go to the National Cathedral here in Washington to pray and reflect on the nature of his responsibility. And he realized that using nuclear weapons would be absolute, utter madness. But because Kim Jong-un was unpredictable and had such an arsenal, he realized he had to think through the possibility, the astonishing weight on his shoulders, that he might have to incinerate millions of people. His relationship with President Trump was not very good, He did not get instructions from President Trump. Nuclear weapons could not be used without the president's authority, but Mattis realized in a very, very important way that his recommendation would have weight. And so Mattis would go to the National Cathedral alone in secret and pray, go to the War Memorial Chapel in the National Cathedral here in Washington, D.C., and reflect on this. And they had operation plans on the shelf, inconceivable that they would ever have to be used, but you have to wrestle with the inconceivable when you're dealing with somebody like Kim Jong-un and President Trump, who was not involved in the details of this. So on the first demarcation line here is July 3rd, 2017, when Kim launched a ICBM that could reach the United States. That was a moment of great worry in this country, and General Brooks, who was the at the time, the commander in South Korea of the joint U.S.-South Korea forces, wanted to somehow respond to this launching of an ICBM. And so this was not publicized directly, but with the permission of Secretary of Defense Mattis, he launched an Army tactical missile into the sea, but it was sent exactly 186 miles, which if they had swung the missile instead of into the sea up to North Korea, it would have landed at the test site and where Kim was actually watching this missile launch. General Brooks issued a statement that got very little attention, was quite provocative. General Brooks said, "Self-restraint, which is a choice, is also one that separates armistice and war." South Korea also fired a test missile as a warning. Then later in the month, July 28th, Kim Jong-un launched an ICBM that could go 6,200 miles. In other words, it could hit almost anywhere in the United States. Then in September 2017, North Korea tested its 16th, North Korea tested its sixth nuclear weapon, a weapon that was 17 times the power of the atomic bomb that was dropped by the United States in 1945 on Hiroshima in Japan. Trump then ratcheted up further his tweets against Kim Jong-un. It said that Kim Jong-un is obviously a madman. General Brooks and Mattis wanted to increase military pressure on North Korea, and they were getting no response. There was no indication that Kim Jong-un knew that the United States and South Korea were testing these missiles. So on September 25th, there was a simulated attack by South Korean and U.S. Forces, 20 airplanes. They crossed the northern limit line in the sea between North Korea and South Korea, and the planes, including a B-1 bomber, headed toward North Korean territory. They did not overfly North Korea, and the South Korean National Security Council sent a message to the United States that maybe perhaps this is getting too provocative. So the situation was one of economic pressure, military pressure, rhetorical pressure. Then at the end of 2017, President Trump visited South Korea. I describe in some detail how General Brooks described to President Trump, because Trump's position was, oh, we're suckers, we have all these 28,000 American military personnel in South Korea. We're paying for this, the United States. We're suckers, we're protecting South Korea. And General Brooks tried to educate President Trump on this and took him over to Camp Humphreys, which South Korea had built as a joint base, a massive base in South Korea, tripled the size of the initial base there. South Korea, as you know, paid $10 billion for this. This was 92% of the cost. When General Brooks told this to President Trump, said, well, why didn't South Korea pay for it all? Brooks explained that there was sensitive communication equipment that by American law had to be paid for and controlled exclusively by Americans and American contractors. Brooks explained to President Trump that South Korea over the last 15 years had spent $460 billion, that's almost $500 billion, to defend themselves, and they overflew part of South Korea, and Trump was in a sour mood about all of this, and they flew over the Samsung operation there in South Korea, and Trump said, we're paying for all of this. And General Brooks tried to say, look, the alliance between the United States and South Korea is one of the best alliances we have. It makes all the sense in the world. And Trump wasn't buying it at all at that point. Trump then gave a speech to the National Assembly there in South Korea, talked about the Korean miracle, the economic miracle of South Korea, an economy 40 times that of North Korea. Then, in a very belligerent way, President Trump said that the United States had 3 aircraft carriers loaded to the maximum in the area, very threatening to North Korea. He said we have nuclear submarines appropriately positioned. So this is the belligerent, dangerous period Trump had with North Korea, and there in South Korea, in this alliance, which is in fact, I believe, one of the great alliances in the world, and has been very effective since the 1950s, when the war didn't end technically, but there was an armistice. And so all of this is going along, and then the South Korean National Security Advisor visited the White House. Trump wanted to meet with him, and the National Security Advisor from South Korea, as you know, and I'm sure reported, told the president that the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was willing to meet with Trump. Trump just said to Chung, go out and announce it there at the White House, and that was done, very unusual to him, and Trump announced he would meet that he would meet with the leader of North Korea, big headlines, very astonishing moment. Then that set in motion the diplomatic phase where I did 19 interviews with President Trump for my book, Rage. We talked a lot about Kim Jong-un and North Korea and South Korea. And Trump told me that Kim Jong-un said he was totally prepared to go to war with the United States, that he expected to go to war. Trump believes by opening the personal channel with Kim Jong-un, he averted that war. Pompeo, the Secretary of State of the United States, was told the same thing by Kim Jong-un, but Pompeo was much, much more skeptical about this and thought it was possibly a bluff, possible that there would not have been a war for a number of reasons, most of all that Kim Jong-un realized that his country could be destroyed by the United States and South Korea. So I was able to gain exclusive access to 25 of the letters exchanged between Trump and Kim Jong-un, which are astonishing. In one of them, Kim Jong-un says our relationship is like it's out of a fantasy film. He calls Trump Your Excellency. Trump said to me in one of our interviews in the Oval Office of the White House, said, see, he calls me Excellency. Felt that was really important. These letters have been analyzed by the Central Intelligence Agency in the United States, and they considered the letters masterpieces, flattering Trump, appealing to Trump's sense of grandiosity, Trump's sense of wanting to be at the center stage. And in one of my interviews with President Trump, I asked about the relationship with Kim Jong-un and the impact on South Korea, and what is really shocking about this, and it's in the book and it's quoted, that President Trump said the United States was allowing South Korea to exist by having this troop presence and of 28,000 troops and all of the other forces arrayed around North Korea. In my view, the idea that the President of the United States would say that, it's insulting. Certainly South Korea, as Trump has said, is an economic and military miracle, and to say that somehow what the United States is doing is allowing them to exist is quite absurd. So Trump had 3 meetings with Kim Jong-un. He actually felt that he got some concessions from Kim Jong-un. Others have been much more skeptical of that. In the first meeting, which was in Singapore, June 2018, Trump announced that he was ending the joint military exercises between the United States and South Korea just unilaterally. And Secretary of Defense Mattis was taken totally by surprise. Mattis felt very strongly, as did the generals at the time on both sides, that you have to have exercises, you have to prepare. and you just don't let the troops sit around the barracks staring at the walls. What Mattis did, working with General Brooks and the South Korean military there, they really had a workaround order. The big spectacular exercises that would be visible to Trump and the news media were canceled, but they still did a lot of exercises with smaller units to make sure that they were prepared. In that first summit, Trump got a written agreement from Kim Jong-un that there would be complete denuclearization of North Korea. None of the intelligence people believed it. It didn't happen. So in February 2019, last year, Trump and Kim met in Hanoi, and Trump said he wanted the 5 nuclear sites that Kim Jong-un had in North Korea given up. Kim said no, he'd only give up the first one. It was a failure, the summit was, and Trump still kind of thought, well, his relationship with Kim Jong-un is so important, so personal, that there would not be a war, and that somehow, after the first summit, Trump literally tweeted out, there's no longer a nuclear threat from the North. And of course, that's absurd. Anyone in the military knows that it's still there. Actually, North Korea has built more nuclear weapons. On June 30th of last year, 2019, Trump spontaneously said he was in the area and wanted to meet with Kim Jong-un at the Joint Security area that marks the line between North Korea and South Korea. They did actually meet. Trump attached great significance to it, told me that Kim Jong-un and the relationship Trump has with him is so solid that everything's going to be fine. In one of the letters, he sent Kim a 4-column picture which had been on the front page of the New York Times and said, quote, "Chairman, great picture of you, big time." In other words, Trump believed and is acting as if he brings Kim into this public relations world that is so significant to Trump and defines much of his presidency. Now, in the book, in the reporting I did, I discovered, and in these 9 hours of interviews with Trump at one point in February, he told me that the virus is airborne and that it's going to be worse than the regular flu, 5 times worse, in fact. Trump then publicly lied and said it's going to go away, don't worry, no concern. I thought in that February discussion Trump was talking about China because the virus was in China, it was not in the United States at that point in any way. And it took me 3 months to establish what happened. This is the luxury of time a reporter can have, and I was discovered in May of this year that at the end of January, and that this is the kind of pivot point in understanding how Trump failed miserably to control the virus in this country. On January 28th, in a top secret meeting in the Oval Office, Trump's national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, said to the president, this virus is going to be the biggest national security threat to your presidency. Then the Deputy National Security Advisor, Matt Pottinger, who had worked as a Wall Street Journal reporter for 7 years in China, had impeccable medical sources in China laid out for the president, how his sources who knew what they were talking about and had evidence that what was coming, the virus was going to come to the United States. It was airborne, it could be transmitted human to human, that people who did not show symptoms actually could transmit the disease, have the disease, and transmit it. And Pottinger explained that instead of this being somewhat similar to what had happened in the 2003 SARS epidemic, what was happening was going to be much more in a significant, dramatic way, like the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic in the United States that killed 675,000 people. The message was clear, it was dramatic. Then a week later, President Trump opened up to me about what he knew. I thought he was talking about China, as I said. Then in March, the pandemic exploded. In another interview with President Trump, I asked him, so why are you saying it's going to go away and not be a serious matter when it clearly is headed in that direction? And the president said to me, he said, well, I like to play it down because I don't want to create a panic. This is a significant part of the tragedy of the Trump presidency. He did not realize or understand the people he led. I believe Americans, like South Koreans, when they're told the truth, don't panic, but step up like you did in South Korea to the nature and of the threat and developed a possibility. Let's see, in South Korea, there have been roughly only 400 deaths. In the United States, which has 6 times the population of South Korea, there have been 240,000 deaths, 500 times as much. The president failed and just continued to fail to mobilize the country, to fully mobilize, to create, as has been suggested, some sort of project like the project to develop the nuclear bomb in before and during World War II, the total collapse of leadership, and not only in the past, not from January 28th forward, but to this day in November, December 2020, the president failed. I believe that the handling of the pandemic and the publicity about the neglect, the negligence on the part of the president had a significant impact on his failure to win re-election on November 3rd. That's being played out in this country and is a manifestation of how President Trump leads through denial, through not believing in science. President Trump doesn't believe in science. In fact, he launched a war against the doctors in the United States, as in excluded them from serious decision-making on this. And so we have a world that is in crisis, a country that is in crisis. We're going to have to figure out over the next weeks and months how Vice President Biden takes over. I think one thing will be clear, that Biden believes, because of his experience in the Senate for decades, for 8 years as President Obama's vice president, how important the alliances and how they are central to a strategic plan to protect the United States and its allies, including South Korea. I know some of those people, and I spent a long time interviewing Vice President Biden when he was vice president for Obama, and he's almost a national security technician. All of the years he's worked on relationships with countries like South Korea, European countries, allies all over the world. So I think there's going to be a kind of total flip once Biden takes office to how do we solidify and grow and establish new trust with our allies. I also believe that there will be some sort of plan to deal with Kim Jong-un that will be more sophisticated diplomatically, certainly will include South Korea. There will not be this bluster that we've heard from Trump about how he allows South Korea to exist, how he believes that the expenditure of money for the troops in South Korea and is somehow makes the United States suckers. I think it's precisely the opposite. I think that the United States is only, in terms of defense and national security policy, only as strong as its alliances. And yes, the America First, the Trump approach has existed for the last 4 years. I think it's been a very dangerous time for the world, for the United States, for South Korea, for Europe, for Japan, you name it. All of the Trump approach is impulsive decision-making, not organizing, not planning, not setting out long-term goals, and just doing it his way. And I think a great price has been paid. I also think that we're going to head back on a much more stable path, but it's not going to be instantaneous, and these fixes and the new approach are going to be complex. What's Kim Jong-un going to do? The relationship Trump had with him has disintegrated in a very significant way, and the love letters are, as best I know, are not being exchanged. So there probably is going to be some effort to work out some sort of diplomatic national security arrangement for the region involving China, Japan, South Korea, the United States. With North Korea, of course, the goal is to eliminate North Korean nuclear weapons. Very ambitious goal. The smartest people I know in the intelligence community think that Kim will never do that voluntarily. It's the source, one of the sources of his strengths in the country and in the world. It gives him power, he believes. So that's gonna be a struggle. What the policy is and whether there's ever some sort of agreement on the Korean Peninsula equivalent to the Iran nuclear deal that the Obama-Biden administration made, which Trump, of course, has torn up, whether there's some possibility of replicating that. So it's going to take months and years to stabilize that relationship. But in the spirit and mood, that's going to change quickly on January 20th when Biden takes office as President of the United States. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed talking to you and wish I could come visit South Korea again soon.